I'm really glad to invite Annabe to take over the microphone, and I'm really looking forward to learning a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities. And as we talked about yesterday, and as Helena also illustrated, South Africa is actually much better at recycling plastic within its country borders than Norwegians are. So please take it away, Annabe.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here, and also thank you to Helena that said a lot of the things that is helping, definitely shaping my presentation as well. I just want to know, is the screen clear?
Hi, Annabe. Yes, we can see your full screen, no notes or anything.
Perfect, fantastic. No, thanks Tara, and thanks Carl for the opportunity. So yeah, I'm going to talk about what happens to the waste or the value chain, and my perspective is very much from a South African basis. Our neighboring countries and the rest of Africa do not have the well-developed recycling value chain that we have in South Africa. So if one look at and a lot of us live next to the coast, and it's these type of images and occurrences that have forced us to start talking. And for my many years in the industry, it's interesting to see that we've really started taking litter and plastic pollution seriously in the last couple of weeks and years. But if you take 2019, 2020, there was just every week webinars and seminars around plastics and the ocean. If we open newspapers or blogs or internet, we all get these very disturbing images and pictures around it, which is great. My topic today is to say, if one look at my bin, and Wednesdays is bin day in Midrand, and you put your waste on the pavement, what happens? Just a quick word, this is not my bin. We do separation at source, and I definitely don't put out not even a tenth of this amount of waste. But yeah, what do we put out? Now, it's great if you live in Midrand and you have a municipality looking after your stuff, but if you live, for example, in an area, and this is a township in Cape Town, where there is no bins that you can put on the pavement. There is no municipal truck that come and collect it. Now, the fact is 29% of South Africans do not have a service. 3% on top of that 29 uses a communal refuse dump. In other words, they're expected to take it somewhere else. And in most cases, a communal refuse dump means a piece of open felt. 2% have some form of service sometimes. And that is a lot of our deep rural areas, for example. So if you add all of this together, I mean, 34% of South Africans have no ways, no means to deal with their waste. So a waste flow could be quite complicated, and I think instead of looking at a picture like this, let's just look at what happens in real life. So putting your bin on the pavement, and then in my case, it's down a panhandle, so I walk back home, and I'm just hoping something is going to happen. In actual fact, I hope that it will be taken to a well-managed landfill. But the chance is also good that people put their waste anywhere. You can just drive next to our highways and our back roads and small roads, and you just see how much illegal dumping is taking place. If you live in an informal settlement, no one is going to look after your waste, so your bin is just going to be a piece of felt or a big bush. And that waste that's lying behind the bush is going to end up in a river and eventually on the beaches. And then we've seen it every day, a hand popping out the window and stuff being thrown out. So yeah, what do I want to talk about? The introduction, which is just done. the process flow of waste. How much are we recycling in South Africa? Where does it go? And why are we not doing better? And then obviously opportunities for questions and answers. And I hope you're all making notes and fire some questions afterwards. And we've seen many of these pictures. So what is recycling? So if I talk about recycling, it can mean many different things. This is just one. And I'm not quite, sorry, it's a woman's joke. Sorry, all with the guys. And then, so if we look at the value chain, starting at from the point of collection, where Helena's company is starting right at number 1. So in South Africa, we refer to those 4 steps as collection. And then the latter part, the recycling, which is really the reprocessing part. So just terminology case, we often have people saying, but I'm doing recycling, meaning I separate my wet and my dry waste, or I'm actually reprocessing it. So our process starts in essence with informal waste pickers in South Africa. That can be guys walking the pavements, going through my bin before the municipal truck arrives and pick out what they need. You can see this guy is not quite as lucky as the guy on the left. And on the right-hand side, waste picking directly from landfill. So the municipal truck have already taken the material to the landfill, and then there's sorters or pickers going through that garbage and collect what has value. They would then sell it to what we call primary collectors. It's people with small means of transport that will buy from these waste pickers either along the streets or even at the landfill. And in most cases, it's just loose bundled waste. We estimate that there's about 59,000 waste pickers and informal collectors like these guys on the screen. But most of these guys not only deal with plastic, because we see the economic cycle for cardboard, glass, plastic, aluminium, very often these cycles don't overlap. So if plastic is very low in revenue, cardboard and specifically K4 cartons is paying better. So most of these guys, they know exactly, you can stop them and ask them what is the London Metal Exchange price today for aluminium, and they would immediately be able to tell you that off the internet on their cell phones. So where does recyclables come from? And I saw, Helena, your pie chart, which was like inverted to ours, which is very interesting. 70% of what we are currently recycled, and remember that's reprocessed in South African language, comes from post-consumer means. So that comes from landfills, from my bin, from the bins at the back of the hotel or the back of the shopping center. Then we have about 13%, which is industrial, which is single source. In other words, on the right-hand side here, we have an alcohol ban at the moment with COVID. So we battle this very little shrink wrap and pallet wrap coming in, which traditionally is around our beers and our wines. Or in this case, irrigation pipe coming out of a shade cloth area in the eastern part of our country, or bobbins that was used for optical fibers. Just examples of things that's sitting in the post-industrial category. Then we have the ex-factory. So they nice, clean, processed stuff. You can see here, it could be etch trim from a film factory, or it could be punch-out handles, or start up and shut down materials when factories process. Toll and in-house recycling is not regarded, generally speaking, as recycling in South Africa. But what does mean is, say a recycler he recycles pipe, he sells his pellets to a pipe factory next door, and that factory take its factory scrap and sell it back to the recycler. We count it simply because not all of his material is then coming from an external source, and it's only those that's included. where normal factories like the ones on the right-hand side here process their own waste and put it back into their system, we do not regard that as recycling. It's just a normal process flow. So what does it mean to process post-consumer waste? And this is a photograph taken from a recycler slightly bigger than Elena's company, close to Gauteng. And he uses, in this case, polyethylene film. Norwegian, I think you call it foil, which is coming straight from landfill. So you can see it's well mixed. This particular recycler recorded roughly between 40 and 45% of the product that he purchased is not plastic. So it's sand, it's leftover food, dead frogs, dead kittens. It could be anything that people have put in these plastic bags before they put it in their bins for landfilling. And that adds to the cost because obviously he's paid for that, but he's not earning any revenue on that. Remember we said the waste picker, he sells it to the primary collector. The primary collector then take it to a site where he bales it or sorts and bales and put it into the different categories, put it on a truck. And this picture is taken at a reprocessor now where the truck arrives. A big interlink like this have about 30 tons of plastic, in this case polyethylene film on it. And the terminology is this backload here would be mix and color, which is printed or colored film. And the front part is known as smoky, which is the high value part. So that is material that was used for things like pallet wrap or shrink wrap. Or even if you just buy at home a 6-pack of not beer, because that's heavily printed, but baked beans or something like that, and you have that wrapping around it, unprinted, clear, very popular. At the reprocessor then these bales get opened and the material gets manually sorted again. And that manual intervention is quite critical. But it's also a big difference in South Africa against European countries where they use infrared scanners to sort. And that means a person can actually identify quite thin pieces of plastic. He can identify black film, which many of your machines can't. And that's often the difference in the statistics and the media hype around flexible plastics or film plastics. Where in South Africa we can recycle it because we have this manual intervention. Right at the back of the picture there is a big hammer mill that will now chop up this bags in this case. Those little flakes then coming out of the hammer mill needs to be washed, and depending on your capital investment, it can typically be washed once, twice, 3 times. Most of the people in post-consumer film will wash up to 4 times. So you wash and rinse, wash and rinse, wash and rinse before you think it's clean enough to move on to the next stage. The challenge around plastic, or where the cost sits, is in actually drying those flakes, because they tend to stick to each other and capture the water in the middle. And drying automatically leads to high electricity cost. And then you have a residual or a sludge, which is the stuff coming out of your wash tanks. And that can contain now pieces of metal, paper, specifically from labels, lots of sand, and also some residual food, which is now like a grease type thing. And as yet, I think there's one recycler that's looking at reusing that sludge by turning it into little bricks for energy, but it's not on a commercial level at all. So that also is a cost and stuff going to landfill. So those little clean, dry flakes now is put through your machine. And this is a considerably smaller machine like the one that Helena showed you. But there are also some very big and sophisticated machines available. And then just terminology, your pellets can either be strands that's cut into small pieces, like on the left, or little round noodles, which is coming from a die-phase cutter. But that's just the machine and the way it cuts the pellets. Now, if one look at recycling, and if you compare it to the guy actually making the film or making the pipe or making the crates, recycling is heavily capital intensive. In South Africa, and this is coming out of the 2019 survey, where we still had a full year of recycling in South Africa, it costs roughly about 9,000 South African rand per ton to process. And the ton here is your annual. So for an investment of about 2 million rand, you would be able to recycle about 200 tons per annum. And no one will make money out of 200 tons per annum. The average recycler in South Africa is doing about 200 tons a month. So to put that in perspective, that would be about 2,000 tons per year. So those pellets then is put into bags and sold on to the customers, which you also saw on Elina's talk. So what is currently being recycled in South Africa? And the difference here is in South Africa, we're different to Norway there, that we actually keep the waste here and we process it here. So our last official stats was for 2019, as mentioned. And you listened to Doe yesterday from Plastics SA. They are the official custodian of the statistics. So we recycled 352,000 tons as a country. And this is this brown heading here is really one of the things that we feel quite proud about, is less than 0.5% of the waste that we collected is actually exported to be processed elsewhere. So we pretty much have established our own recyclers and our own markets in South Africa over the years. Of all the recyclable waste available in South Africa, we've collected about 45%, which is what we also refer to as the so-called input recycling rate for the people that have looked at the EPR regulations. But yes, we're not remotely there yet. There's still more than 1 million tons that we're not recycled. We're not proud of that, so we don't put it back on the billboards, but that's really the part that the industry needs to work on much harder and with much more effort. So how much is it? And it's really just to try and get a perspective. It's roughly like 4 MSC cruise liners. I haven't been standing next to the cruise liner, so it doesn't mean anything to me. I drive a little Polo Cross. So it is the fuel equivalent of 200,000 little Polo Crosses doing 30,000 kilometers an annum. With COVID, we haven't quite driven that much. So it's really a whack. It's not enough yet. We still need to do much more. Or in a milk bottle equivalent, if you take 19 million milk bottles every day for a whole year, that's how much we've recycled in 2019. I don't have a clue how much is 19 million milk bottles. I just can't visualize it, so it stays difficult. Okay, and maybe I should ask the audience quickly, what is the material that's most recycled in South Africa? Is there anyone that is brave enough to give me an answer?
Is it not polyethylene?
Okay, Raisa says polyethylene. Any other votes?
Same.
Same. Okay, you obviously done your homework already. Good for you. Yes, you're 100% right. And how do I change my view again? There we go. So if one look at the total of that 350,000 that we've recycled, polyethylene, that film that I showed you in the slides, is really our most recycled material in South Africa. Of all the plastic, 34% was bread bags, frozen veggie bags, the bags around your toilet paper, the bags around your magazine that you get. Those are all in that category. PET is second, and specifically beverage bottles. We do not recycle anything else in PET in South Africa, but water and cool drink bottles. And then on the HD side, a very popular material, although the tonnage is not as high. And that could be anything from chemical drums, milk bottles, domestic cleaners, personal care, crates, whole variety. And then on the polypropylene side, anything from your chocolate wrapper to your coat hangers to your margarine tub. And then the smaller families would be your PVC, which is very little packaging because we don't have much PVC packaging. And then on the polystyrene side, it's also packaging as well as non-packaging. The Danone yogurt tubs have recently only changed to polypropylene in South Africa. And that's why they're still photographed in 2019 as polystyrene. So where does this go? And obviously, if we take the previous slide, the bulk of it was flexible polyethylenes. So we expect that the market is also going to be flexible and 100% correct. This big brown blob here on my graph is flexible packaging. So many of the shopping bags that we get in South Africa is made from recycled film. Our garbage bags is all recycled film. And then a lot of other packaging. We love to braai. So we buy our wood in a little bag that's not quite clear, which is made from 100% recycled material. If you buy a mattress or a filing cabinet, those furniture shrouds are all made from recycled plastic. Other big category is this grey block here, which is building and construction. So that is things like damp cores, under tile plastics, water pipes, sewage pipes coming to the house, taking waste away from the house. Clothing and footwear, and that's where the PET ends up mainly, and on the footwear side, the PVC. And the other big one that I'll just is agriculture, and there we have anything from feeding troughs, drinking troughs, pipes. South Africa is very dry, so farmers need to get water to the animals, and the bulk of that is recycled plastic. Even rotational molded tanks are made from recycled plastic. So if one just look at recycling rates, and I added this slide because I was talking at one of the brand owners earlier, where they say, now how much are we recycled? So if you just look at these, for example, that plastic film, the complete bar is how much is produced in South Africa, and the green part is then how much was reprocessed into raw material again last year. So in this case, we talk about a so-called output recycling rate, just to confuse everyone more. So why are we not recycling more? And being a part of this industry, one keep on thinking, what can we do to achieve better rates? So one example is that we still have a lot of packaging that's not recyclable. And these are just examples. It's not any way of talking against these brands. It's purely just products that we have in our cupboards and see every day. Now, multi-layers is being recycled in South Africa, and we see it in these polywood furniture type applications. But that's only clean post-industrial material. In other words, the factory making the Omo detergent pouch, their offcuts and misprints will go into the furniture. So none of our so-called polywood recyclers have wash facilities. So they only use clean stuff. Maybe products are too small, because if you imagine someone on a landfill and he needs to pick up waste, he's not going to bother with a tiny piece of polyprop wrapper. They do get recycled if they arrive in the system. But no one is going to bend down on the pavement and pick it up and put it in a bag and take it for recycling. There may be not a market, and in the rPET trays case, a lot of our beverage bottles ends up in these see-through trays for fresh produce, and those trays are not getting recycled because there's not a market for that material. There was a problem around the carrier bags in South Africa where people had put in too much filler. That issue have been resolved, and carrier bags are now being recycled again. Even in 2019, we've already started. Maybe it's uneconomical, and I know there's lots of talk specifically at SST later today. We have a discussion around the money aspects about recycling. There could be not enough. Now, if you take PVC packaging, it's a tiny market in South Africa, and it's just not going to justify a recycler putting up a plant for 200 tons a month, because he's not going to get 200 tons a month. Transport costs, your lightweight polystyrene, there's a lot of recyclers, but they're only in the metropolitan areas where they don't have to transport the expanded polystyrene for long distances. At the moment, there's a massive drive because the established recyclers of EPS, they can't get enough, because takeaway food is with COVID not a big thing. And they just do not have the input material at the moment. Residual contents also plays a role. If you just look at your cosmetic counter and at your bathroom bags, a lot of these little tubes, 100% recyclable, no problem, but we normally throw them away when they're still half full of hand lotion or facial cream that went off, and that makes the recycling process uneconomical, because you wash this oily residue, cost you much more to do than actually recover the bit of plastic. Then we still have lots of challenges around actually marking it, especially newer types of products. Remember, we sort by hand, and if you're unsure, we quickly look for the material identification code, and if it says other, it's just going to go into the bin. So what can be done to recycle more? So if one look at that graph I had earlier on, it really says, how do we raise the grey higher? And aspect that needs to be addressed is how do we design for recycling? And obviously this talks very loud and clearly to the brand owners around packaging. The whole thing of education and awareness, and there's many drives. I'm not sure Doe spoke to you yesterday about all the things that Plastics SA is doing around this. SST has huge initiative. The African Network for Marine has lots of education, but definitely still not enough. I think we tend to leave it to the formal structures instead of just each of us just spread the news every day to everyone we get into contact with. We need to develop more end markets. There's already quite a good lot, because in the South African context, and I think we differ there to Norway, it's not the right thing to do to recycle. It's about there's a demand. Someone wants that material, and he said, listen, I'm looking for black polyethylene. The recycler then tells the collector tells the waste picker, and we start looking for polyethylene. But no one actually collects polyethylene with the hope there's going to be a market for it. So the more we can have end markets, the better. And then everyone that's in a decision environment needs to also start including recycled content. But there's a bit of a, I wouldn't say a shame, but I don't really want to sell you shoes and tell you that the shoe soles has been communication cables. In a small part of our community, that seems to be prestige, but in overall it says it's inferior, I don't want it. Then a definite, we have to start separating at source. Every household should be able to separate, and I'm not even talking about that 30% that doesn't have a bin. If the 70% that can start doing it, we've already achieved something. So we'll increase recycling rates, reduce plastics litter, because we often see that we're not recycling enough, and therefore we have the microplastics in the sea and on the beaches. I'm not sure that's going to solve the problem. So we need to do something else. So if one look at the stats, and I showed it earlier coming from Stats South Africa, instead of looking at households, we just say 12% of people living in the cities doesn't have access to waste management. And I'm not talking someone living in the sticks far away from anything. I'm talking about people sitting in the middle of Gauteng, people sitting in the middle of Port Elizabeth that doesn't have access. So the bottom one is just saying, if you're a waste picker, 1 kilogram of bottle caps, and by the way, they're very popular. The recyclers, the reprocessors love them. They want more and more of it because it's a very good quality material. A waste picker have to bend down 300 times to pick up 1 kilogram of bottle caps, and that 1 kilogram will earn him an income of 3 rand. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to do that. Not even the poorest person is going to bend down 300 times for 3 rand. It's just not happening. So if one put that in a schematic, and Helena used a similar chain. So currently my bin goes with the municipal truck. Somewhere the waste picker collects it either from the bin or from the landfill. He then sells it to a collector. The collector compacts it, put it on a truck, and send it to the reprocessor. What is wrong with this? There's too many steps. From me putting the waste out till the recycler. And each of those steps adds costs, and those added cost doesn't bring any value. And then there's only the so-called economic materials. The waste picker is not going to bend down 300 times for 3 rand because he's looking for a reward for effort. So he's only going to do the big stuff, a 2-liter water bottle, instead of, because for a 2-liter water bottle, he needs to pick up 20 for 2 rand instead of 300 bottle caps. So what's going to happen with the stuff that's not rewarded for effort? So what are we looking at the moment? There's 2 big drives. There's this SA Plastics Pact, which is the same as the European Plastics Pact. WWF and the South Africa Plastics Recycling Organization started it, and they look at specifically targets for recyclable content, for recycled content, but it's recycling driven. Then you have on the other side of the coin, you have the South Africa Initiative to End Plastics Waste in the Environment. Plastics SA and the Consumer Goods Council are the founders of that. And they look specifically at how do we collect the waste? How do we get it out of the rivers, out of the beaches, out of the townships? And then number 4 here is, what can we do with that to create that demand? Linked with that is then the ever-growing presence of bioplastics, and I'm specifically referring to compostables and biodegradables here. And then how do we tell people what to do with their waste? So what is the proposed value chain looking like that the Plastics Initiative to End Plastics Waste is proposing? Is that we separate, and we don't say it has to be 3 bins, it can be 2 bins, but at least separate wet and dry. Then take your recyclables to a sorting facility. And the picture shows a fancy conveyor with a mechanical dumper, but it could be in smaller towns, it could be a concrete slab with a shade cloth over it. At a certain time of day, you allow the pickers in for job creation. They sort through the waste, they still sell it to the small collector, but it's much cleaner, it's much better. So if one just put my points on here, the main purpose of that is less steps that can add cost. So the dry waste could be anything. You don't have to ask people, do you think this is recyclable or not? You just take everything to a central spot. It's waste pick. And again, it would be effort for reward, but then your residual materials is all in one spot. And that's where technology then can kick in, and you can say, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, all labor must be off the site, and you send in a bulldozer and a granulator, and you'd make bricks, or you use it for cement roads or whatever. But the material is then in one spot. And it's essential. We have to find these alternatives to recycling, because recycling alone, and we said that already with my little parrot earlier on, is not going to solve it. So what do we need to do? We need to increase recycling rates, no doubt, but we also need to look at alternatives. Now, what is currently available in South Africa, there's trials on with cement in, plastics in roads. There's already a lot of companies making bricks or building blocks and pavers, mixing plastic and sand, or plastic and glass, plastic and cement. The challenge with that currently is that waste is too expensive, because it went through that complete value chain and then come to the brick making facility, and it just costs too much. Or pyrolysis, we only have one commercial facility in South Africa. The top picture here is more showing, let's call it the rural processes. There's quite a bit of farmers or small communities that use them unofficially. But we have one facility in East London that can make solvents from plastic waste. And then there's a whole crowd of people that can do compression molding. And I've added for you on the slides a couple of websites of companies doing this. To say, you know, instead of melting the stuff through the traditional method, what else can be done? So I'm concluding, and this is my church sermon that I'm finishing with. I think plastics are here to stay, but each of us, everyone, have to think and rethink and think again about our consumption habits. Do I really need this thing? And I'm not only talking packaging, I'm talking across. We need to reduce our waste. We're much too wasteful as a people. We need to design things for the end of its first life, because as we know, the circular economy is going to take our stuff and turn it into products again. We need to recycle more. We need to use more recycled. And even as consumers, we can look out for things that contains recycled content. We need to find alternative solutions. And then this whole thing about sustainability in everything you do. If you dish up a plate of food, is it just enough to eat, or are you going to throw half of it away? If you shower, do you really need to shower for 15 minutes, or would 2 minutes do the same thing? And then we need to get the waste to the reprocessor quicker and cheaper. And really, that's me. And just a final touch, we need to set some aspirations, and we need to venture into new areas and see if we can't just get rid of all the waste that we generate on a daily basis. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Hi, Annabe. There are already a few questions coming through in the chat. From Katerina, it says, Dear Annabe, what plastic materials are mainly included in the 1 million tons that is not recycled in South Africa?
Well, it's quite easy. It's actually all plastics, because it's not only linked to specifics. So if you look at the commonly available materials, those are all recycled, but there's still tonnages not recycled. And it comes in through these, if you take bottle caps, I mean, that's the same as milk bottles. Milk bottles have an 80% recycling rate in South Africa, and bottle caps, very little, because no one picks it up. So it's the same plastics that we are recycling that's also not recycled.
There's another question from Justin that says, Hello Annabe, what type of plastic is produced by recycling polyethylene, and what kind of contaminants do you think would make it through the recycling process and into the final product? Organic and heavy metal contaminants.
Hello Justin. That's a difficult one. Organic matter, now, okay, I need to maybe say, in selecting your capital equipment for recycling, you can venture and buy machines of, and if I talk South African rand currencies, There's one recycler in Joburg, for example, that bought a very nice pelletizer machine for 28 million South African rand. And I can tell you now, if that guy processes polyethylene, there's no organic pollutants left, because it goes through a vacuum suction system, not once, but 3 times, to take out any organic stuff, persistent organics or whatever. Your mechanical contamination, like pieces of paper or pieces of metal, gets screened out. They're actually the easier part to take out of your melt. But then also we have about 300 recyclers in South Africa. I can tell you now that more than 100 of those have purchased Chinese equipment that you can buy a complete machine for about 1 million versus the 28 million of the other guy. And those machines are not going to get rid of all the organics. And that's where we need to be careful as scientists. So if we do our trials and say, does the recyclate contain anything? We need to look at how it was recycled, because not all recycling processes are the same. So Justin, it could be anything or it could be nothing. Depends on what process and what machinery they used.
Thanks, Annabe. There's another question from Rafilwe that says, hi, Annabe, thank you for the informative talk. Is there a concern with microplastics pollution when producing bricks and roads, or are the long-term impacts accounted for?
That's an interesting thing, because in both cases, there are current trials on. CSIR is busy with trials to see what happens to the plastics that's encapsulated in the bitumen. For the roads, because there's 2 methods, and we often get referrals around the Indian process for plastics in roads, which they call the dry process. So a layer of plastic is going onto the road, covered then with bitumen or a top layer. Or the South Africa trials at the moment is the so-called wet method, where the bitumen and the plastics goes through a preparation process, and the plastics is encapsulated. But the CSIR is busy currently with a trial with a piece of road where they monitor everything that comes off that road with wash water and weather and vehicles going over it to see the impact, because I don't think we've done enough homework around that. For the buildings, it's a similar question. The typical, and I don't know if you remember seeing that brick, let me see if I can go at the bottom left corner here now. It's well encapsulated, and most of these houses get plastered as well. So while you sit there, microplastics is not going to come off, but we don't know what's going to happen if that becomes building rubble. So, and there are also Polyco, one of the product responsibility organizations, currently is investigating potential research on that, to say, how do we ensure that we're not creating just a problem 20 years from now by putting those plastic out there.
There's another question that says, do you know how much the picker can sell the plastic for per ton, and what the later value is?
Sorry, what value is?
What the later value is. I'm assuming that means after the waste picker has sold the plastic to a recycler, what the value will be at the end of the recycled material.
Yeah, remember the waste picker sells, where is that value chain of us? If we take this, it's like, sorry, I'm jumping here. So if we say this waste picker, remember he sells to a collector, that still needs to bale and take it. And quite often there's even another collector here that takes higher volumes. So waste picker on average is getting between 2 Rand and 3 Rand a kilogram currently. And then each step here would typically add another 50 cents. So the recycler or the reprocessor purchase average price currently sits at about 3.50, 3.50 Rand. But bearing in mind there are plastics that gets better value. White sorted milk bottles at the moment is 6 Rand. The processor will pay 6 Rand for that. Where your mix and color and printed things like carrier bags would be the 3 Rand 50. So the price varies quite a bit, but what I find interesting, if you take the average over a year, for the last 10, 12 years, it haven't gone anywhere. It stayed exactly between 2 Rand 50 and 5 Rand for very white, clear, sorted stuff.
Thanks, Annabe. There's another question that came through on the chat that says, what about trash going out of the bin due to things like rats, seagulls, pests, etc., picking it out, or natural disasters like extreme rainfalls or wind that take away garbage? Are there any good solutions for that?
Not currently. And you're talking about rats taking it out of the bins. So if you think of what happens on our landfills, and we have such few landfills in South Africa, which is properly managed and maintained. You just have to drive around our countryside to see that many of the small towns, landfill means a piece of felt outside of the town. So that's part of the challenge is those mismanaged waste. And I have another quite busy picture showing, you know, we have waste that never actually enters the bin, and then we have waste that enters the bin, went through the system up to the landfill, and then it's not properly managed. And those are the problem areas, and that's where the SA initiative to end plastics in the environment is saying, what do? We can have cleanup campaign after cleanup campaign, but before we're not closing the tap, and before we're not having systems where every consumer can actually say, I know where my piece of waste is going, we're not going to solve that problem.
There's a question from Leslie that says, is the material taken out of South Africa for recycling? I think it was 0.4% exported because we do not have the facilities to recycle that material, or is there a different reason?
No, it's money. If a person pay you more somewhere else for it, you rather do that. So in most cases, it's purely there's a demand for it and it went out. But what is included there is also plastic that's not locally recycled. A small portion, there is one electronic plastic waste, I don't know where the word order is, that pelletize in South Africa, but most of that 0.4% is actually computer casings, printer casings, cell phone covers. So it's plastics coming out of the electronic disassembly process.
Thanks, Annabe. Henk has had his hand raised for a while. Henk?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Annabe. I'm always amazed at the knowledge you have about plastics in South Africa. Thank you very much for the very informative talk. I'd just like to, I think Justin raised it, about the pollutants in the plastics. Definitely, they are in the plastics that's in the environment. We've seen, in marine plastics, we've seen DDTs and PCBs from the Indian Ocean coast of South Africa, and then further up in the Indian Ocean on remote islands, coral reef islands, we've picked up plastics with almost every possible persistent organic pollutant you can think of, including mercury. So these metals do accumulate, or somehow when it gets in the environment, or perhaps in contact with other things, then do pick up these pollutants, and it seems to quite an extent. And I'm, a bit concerned that if we do recycling of plastics, we recycle and possibly concentrate these things that are more resistant to breakdown than plastics itself. And what that means, now I think there was a previous question on the McDonald's trays and things like that. So to me, that is in an economy that tries to recycle we should be aware of not recycling, or at least be aware of stuff that recycles with the plastic itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Henk, and thank you for your kind words, and please continue testing for us what's out there. Yes, plastics adds a fantastic surface, and if the plastic is in the environment, the pollutants in the environment is going to stick to it. And I think that's we just know that, and I think that's why it's so crucial that we need to separate the materials out of the waste stream before it even have time to sit next to my doom can or my fertilizer bags or whatever. So, and that's why we so strongly promoted that at household level, when I take the bag off my bread, that goes into a bin and goes straight to the reprocessor. So that chance of adhering pollutants and poisons and toxins onto it, we must try and eliminate that as much as we can. And I also agree with you, there's a big drive to recycle these materials that's coming off our beaches and the rivers. There's even a drive to remine landfills to get plastics out of it. And before we don't have proper testing facilities that we know what is on that material, I'm definitely not going to sell it to McDonald's for a food trade. So.
Thanks, Annabe. Some good points there. There's a question that says, are there efforts in promoting recycling, and if so, how well are they received and implemented?
Efforts to improve. You can just listen to Doe. I think Doe spends 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year on efforts on promoting recycling. Yes, we are, but we also know that South Africans are by nature very lazy. And if it's easier to put my stuff in the bin and put it on the pavement and forget about it, I'm rather going to do that than start a second bin and separate and pull off the labels and put it in the right bins. I had some visitors last weekend in my house. We shared some Christmas presents, and I said, well, please guys, we recycle in this house. That's where the paper goes, that's where the plastic goes. And when they all left, I had to go through the plastic bag and pull out the dirty cans and the dirty paper and the tea bags, because it was obviously just too much effort. So yeah, we promote it, and there's lots of efforts going on, but it's a slow process, and that's why we still sit with that 1 million tons that's going nowhere.
Then one last question from Benjamin that says, do you know how thermoplastics are handled in South Africa? Sorry, thermoset plastics.
Thermosets, yeah, thermosets are not recycled. They're less than 2% of the plastics produced in South Africa. The factories, and Circuit Breaker Industries is our biggest company in South Africa processing thermosets. They have a process in their factory where they take the offcuts and out of spec products, and they pulverize it into a fine powder, and they use that as a filler again in their process. But I'm not aware of any post-recycling, post-consumer recycling for thermosets. The resin industry, interesting enough, in other words, the people making glass reinforced plastics like used for bakkie canopies and chemical containers. They are looking currently at incineration, or incineration with energy, they're getting energy from it. So it's just not burning it, but actually, and they are trialing products currently in cement kilns in South Africa. But to date, there's no stats on thermosets because it doesn't get collected and recycled.
Thank you so much, Annabe. This is so fascinating and so illustrating to some of the challenges and opportunities that do exist. I just have to leave you. I need to get into another meeting, but this is wonderful. And to the rest of you, we'll pick it up again tomorrow morning. And thanks again to Annabe. And again, we'll make the slides and the presentation available for you to dig further in.
Paul.
And I'm sure Annabe will be happy to support any additional information that might be necessary. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.